Hello, my name is BREAK, and welcome to my Ganyu video. In this video, I'm going to talk about how she plays, her teams, and her builds, and yeah, let's just get right into it. So, starting off with Ganyu's builds here, weapon-wise, Almost's bow is by far her best option. It's an insane stat stick, and then of course, this second passive is guaranteed to be maxed basically for your bloom, so yeah, just insane. Skyward Harp is always great, good attack right, makes your crit ratios really easy to build, but yeah. Other than that, it's much weaker than Almost's bow. Well, much weaker is relative, but it's noticeably weaker. Thundering Pulse is probably your second best option after Almost's. It's really good still. You know, great crit damage attack, just great stat stick in general. It's really solid. And in the same vein, Polar Star is also quite a solid stat stick. It's a little bit more awkward to proc, but you know, you can just drop your flower and your burst and you'll get 2 stacks, so yeah. And then you can normal if you really want the third, but yeah. 4-star options, honestly speaking, the craftable bow, right? Prototype Crscent is definitely the way to go. The only problem with this is that hitting the weak points is really annoying. I'll probably talk about that more later. And a lot of mobs don't have weak points. There's a lot of problems with this bow, but it's nonetheless very strong for her. So, you know, I would probably go with this over anything else, but do keep in mind that there are problems with this weapon. Outside of that, I don't know. The 4-star options aren't fantastic. I mean, Viridescent Hut is fine just for crit stat sticks, and Black Cliff is the same, right? But yeah, other than that, not much else to say. Moving on to the artifacts. So there are a couple artifacts that she can run. So we'll start with Freeze Ganyu, I suppose. For Freeze Ganyu, you definitely go with Blizzard Strayer. Blizzard Strayer is the best, you know, 40% crit rate is insane. It's just really good. If you're playing Melt Ganyu though, of course, you won't get the 4-piece effect of Blizzard Strayer. There's no point in doing that. You can bridge for Melt Ganyu as well with 2 Blizzard Strayer, 2 Glad, but otherwise you should probably be going for, well, it depends, but Wanderer's Troop is generally what I would consider the best because her burst is pretty strong. Of course, she has her Ascension talent that gives her a 15% extra crowd damage bonus. It's pretty good. And then, of course, the third set that I'm talking about is Shimenawa's. And Shimenawa's is fine, but since it drains your burst, it's quite a bit weaker for Ganyu. If you're playing certain melt setups that are very finicky and very precise, then maybe you don't use your burst, and then, of course, you can actually use Shimenawa's. But generally speaking, Wanderer's Troop is going to be the better option, which is a little bit awkward because on one hand, you know, you're getting these all the time because you're farming bosses, weekly bosses and whatnot, and that's great. But on the other hand, it's really hard to farm a very strong set of this because it's basically 40 resin to run an artifact domain, if you will, right? If you're just farming for the artifacts, and that's a lot rougher. Honestly speaking, you should probably be using your strong boxes to farm for Wanderers, in my opinion. So if you are going to farm for Wanderers, definitely utilize the strong boxes. To talk about substats and main stats, cryo damage bonus, of course, crit, and attack, pretty normal stuff. You do want a little bit of ER just to have her burst up consistently, hopefully, especially if you're on Morgana. But yeah, I mean, you're going to need a decent amount of ER. If you have like C1 and C2, then like, man, you barely need any ER. But yeah, I mean, you don't really need the ER, honestly. I don't think it's really worth sacrificing damage for ER. But if you can get the, I don't know, just random substats for ER, it's very nice to have. Because her burst is pretty nice. And of course, you can loop it constantly. So you'll always have that cryo damage bonus. So it is very nice to have. Now, something to note is that her Ascension talent gives her 20% crit rate. And if you're running Morgana and you're running, you know, 4-piece Blizzard, you're going to be getting, you know, 60% crit rate from your artifacts and your Ascension, and then of course you're gonna have your Resonance, so you're getting 75% crit rate without even accounting for substats. So if you're running like Harp even, you basically need 0 crit rate. So you should basically prioritize crit damage at all times. Ganyu, her passive gives her 20% crit rate regardless, so even if you're running like Wanderers and like Melt comps, you still, generally speaking, skimp on the crit rate. For example, I'm running 55 crit rate, but with her Ascension, it becomes 75. So yeah, just basically add 20 if you're running like Melt or, you know, non-Morgana. And then if you're running, you know, 4-piece Blizzard and like 2 Cryo for Morgana, then of course you can add a lot more crit rate and just calculate it out like that. But yeah, that's all I had to say about that. Alright, moving on to the talents. Obviously, her charge shot, her normals are her most important talent. But to be fair, if you're running Morgana or any grouping comp, right, this will deal a ton of damage, your burst. So you definitely need to level up your burst. Your skill is not as important. There is like extra health, right? But it's not really that important because generally speaking, I don't think it'll break very easily. It's usually fine, right? Like, it has like double your health, which is like 30,000-ish. It'll survive a decent amount of hits. At like even like level 6 maybe. But yeah. Well, actually, it won't have 200. It'll probably have more like 160, 170. But even then, it should survive quite a few hits. So, you know, generally speaking, it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, overall, charge shot for sure. Burst is really strong as well, so probably do level this up. And then if you're finding your flower to be breaking too often, definitely you can go ahead and level that up as well. So let's just get this out of the way really quickly. I'm C6R2 right now in this video, so I should mention that I do try to play around that, right? Like, I do use my burst very sparingly. I of course spam my burst when I'm breaking shields. That's just, you know, how Ganyu breaks shields, so I gotta do that. But other than that, I don't use my burst as much as I can. So hopefully that's a little bit closer to a C1 R1 probably. I don't think I can get very close to a C0 R1 honestly, but I think I'm close-ish to a C1 R1. Of course, I also, whenever I use my flowers, I hold my charge shot to simulate a normal Ganyu charge shot, so yeah. Anyways, with that being said, let's just continue on then. Okay, so actually talking about Ganyu as a DPS, she's still really strong. I don't think that's too surprising, but yeah, she does a lot of damage. Now, to be fair, I think that honestly speaking, she's really annoying to play if you're using Prototype Crscent. Charge shots are fine, in my opinion, but when you also have to aim for weak points and stuff, it gets a little bit more annoying. Especially if you're, you know, animation canceling and stuff, which I'll talk about later. It's quite, I don't know, it's really annoying in my opinion. On top of that, some enemies don't have weak points, so Prototype Crscent becomes useless, and it's just all over the place. But yeah, Ganyu just doesn't have excellent options for weapons outside of the 5-star ones, and of course Amos's bow is just super strong on her. So if you can get the Amos's bow, or you have the Amos's bow, it's really going to help out. Now, to be fair, even without the super strong weapon options, her sheer damage output is just so high, especially with Melt Ganyu, that it almost doesn't even matter. So yeah, I mean, she's still really strong regardless, right? But yeah, Amos's bow is pretty game-changing for Ganyu in my opinion, so that is something to take note of. So I did mention Ganyu animation canceling, and it's a lot easier than it sounds. It's really just holding down your left mouse button to fire your charge shots rather than just staying in charge stance all the time. And basically, when you're in charge stance, there's this slight delay between your charge shot going off and your next charge shot, whereas if you basically use your left mouse and let go and then immediately start charging again, you'll basically cancel that little downtime, and you get quite a bit of extra damage from this. Like, you know, it depends on, you know, dodging and stuff, but if you aren't dodging, if you aren't moving, it's just Ganyu's charge shot, you're like charging like 15% faster. So yeah, it's pretty strong. So I mentioned that of course I'm spamming my burst to break shields, and that is something that Ganyu is quite exceptional at. Like, she is super strong at breaking shields. You know, her burst hits a lot, her charge shots are hitting twice, you know, her flowers being put down and hitting twice, you know, because of the placement damage, and then of course the damage when it fades. And yeah, she does a ton of cryo applications, so if it's non-cryo shield, she'll eat through it pretty well. So that's great. And of course, something else to note is that if you need to break shields, it is quite important to have good energy generation on her so she can loop her burst. But yeah, Now, she excels at, multi-target damage, right? Because, her bloom is so good at AoE damage, and her single target damage is definitely not quite as impressive if you're using like Morgana comps and whatnot, but if you're using Melt Ganyu, man, her damage I think is just ridiculous, right? Like, you're hitting like 200,000 on your charge shot plus bloom. That's like crazy. Of course, I have very good substats and I have constellations and Almos's bow, but 200,000 is overkill at that point. You don't need to deal 200,000. So yeah, it's really good. But yeah, single target damage is definitely suffering a little bit, a tiny bit, if you're not using Melt. But if you're using Melt, I mean, I don't think it matters. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Morgana, right? So, I think I've illustrated a lot of negatives about Morgana, but Morgana is a very strong comp, right? This comp, abuses freeze is extremely strong, and then of course the Mona is very good. Grouping with Venti or even Kazuha is really strong in conjunction with Ganyu's burst. It's a team that really synergizes very well. It's very strong. Now, of course, if we're talking about freeze teams in general, there is also the other variant of the freeze team, which is using Shenhe, which you might have because she was just out, and of course also using Kokomi. For Ganyu in particular, it's difficult to sub out Kokomi because you do need a Hydro healer, and the other option you have, well, Xingqiu doesn't work. I don't think he heals quite enough to be comfortable, and Barbara, you have to be in melee range in order to apply Hydro, so it's really annoying to play that way. But yeah, it's pretty tough to build that team, ton of 5 stars, and I would say the same case is kind of for Morgana, because Mona is a 5-star and she's a standard banner 5-star, right? So it's interesting because generally speaking you'll have her, but some people just don't have her, right? And that will hurt. But yeah, because of that, this team comp is very strong still, but I think there's a lot of things to watch out for because, this Abyss is a great example of, MiHoYo just hating against freeze. Now, I don't think that's actually, truly the goal of this Abyss. I think the goal of this Abyss is just to show how strong Shenhe can potentially be, right, by making everything single target so Shenhe's stacks don't get wasted, but, they could go in a direction eventually where freeze doesn't work on a lot of enemies. So that's something to always, think about. That makes Blizzard's Trayer a lot weaker, of course, and yeah, I mean, Morgana in general becomes much weaker with that, so yeah. And then of course, Morgana also struggles with single target damage compared to Melt Ganyu, so yeah. I think that Morgana is extremely strong, but there are things to watch out for that I don't think you quite need to worry about with Melt Ganyu. So yeah, let's just talk about Melt Ganyu next then. I think that Melt Ganyu, generally speaking, gets a very bad rap for being difficult to play and really annoying and very finicky. And that's kind of true, but I think that there are ways to play around that. So let's talk about Anemo abuse first. This is the version of Melt that I like less, but it's still, it's higher damage. So we should probably talk about this first. Now what I mean by Anemo abuse is basically using Anemo characters to apply Pyro. So there's 3 ways you can do this. Venti Burst Infusion, Kazuha Burst Infusion, or using Bennett and Jean in conjunction, and Jean's constant Anemo application on yourself and Bennett's constant Pyro application on yourself will keep proccing swirls basically, which will apply Pyro on your enemies. So yeah, what this does is basically it allows you to melt even under Ganyu bursts consistently. So it's really strong, but the problem with this team is of course that it's very high commitment, right? If you get hit while you're in your animation, you're going to waste a bunch of time and a bunch of DPS, and because you're not running a shielder generally, this can be really tough to play, and yeah, it's really annoying. You get hit all the time, you really have to play very well, place your flowers down. It's definitely not an easy to play team, and I personally do not like this team anywhere near as much as the shielding teams, right? And the shielding teams, of course, utilize Zhongli. Zhongli is really good. I'm going to show off a team with Zhongli Bennett and Zhongli. And of course that means that you can't use Zhongli for your national teams, but I mean this is basically replacing your national teams, honestly. And it's really strong. It's really easy to play because, you know, Zhongli just makes it so you don't have to worry about anything. And then of course you're going to be melting all of your charge shots with Zhongli, but you won't be able to drop your burst. But it's so unnecessary because you deal so much damage with that team that it just doesn't matter. And it's really strong. It's easy to play, really effective. I think it's a great team, you know. You can hit like 200,000 on your charge shots pretty, I don't know if it's that easy, but if you have really strong artifacts and Almost's bow, you can definitely hit that. And I mean, on a single charge shot, that's an incredible amount of damage, right? Your Bloom's going to be dealing like 150,000 damage. That's like absolutely insane. So basically my point is that the team's easy to play and it deals an insane amount of damage. There's definitely a lot of investment to be made, right? You do have to invest in Zhongli, make sure he has HP on his shields. You do have to make sure you have ER on your Bennett and your Xiangling, but it's just such a strong team. It's really easy to play. And then of course, something else to note is that even if you have a cryo-immune enemy, generally speaking, if you have Xiangling built well, Xiangling will be able to kill because she just has really high damage on her burst. So yeah, it's just a really good team. Really easy to play in my opinion, and yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend it. It is my personal favorite Ganyu team, so definitely a bunch of bias, but yeah. So I mentioned Zhongli, and I think that Zhongli is, in my personal opinion, almost a must for playing Ganyu. It makes her life so much easier, unless you have C6. If you have C6, honestly, you can play without Zhongli very easily, but if you're C0, Zhongli just makes your life so much easier. I would highly recommend getting Zhongli. He's on banner as well. It's just really comfortable. Now, you do need to build him with HP, but, you know, that's not that hard. You do need to level up his talents, but I think it's worth the investment. You know, Melt Ganyu is super easy to play with Zhongli, as I've already extensively talked about, and it's extremely potent. And of course, there is something to mention, a downside really quickly, that I shouldn't mention actually, which is that Zhongli's pillar can actually eat pyro from the enemies, so you definitely do need to place your pillars away from the enemies. But other than that, I mean, it's fairly simple to play. Shimenawa is of course more interesting with this team because you kinda don't want to use Ganyu's burst because it involves like RNG, sometimes you might not get your melt on your charge shots, so it's just a little bit iffy. And because of that, you don't use a burst, and Shimenawa suddenly becomes much stronger. So yeah, you can use Shimenawa for this team, or the Zhongli Xiangling Bennett comp. Something else to mention about Zhongli is that he doesn't quite work out for the, you know, freeze comps like Morgana, because, you know, Shatter is kind of a non-bow, and I've already mentioned that if you're not freezing with Morgana, it's a much weaker team. Like, you're losing out so much damage because you're losing out the crit rate on your Blizzard Stray pieces. It's just much worse, right? And of course, if you're freezing in the first place, you don't really need Zhongli, so it just doesn't quite work in general. As for like animal abuse melt comps, I think it's actually usable there, right? Like, you can just have your Anemo, your Pyro, and then you have Zhongli and then Ganyu. Of course, you know, that works, but I think it's, I don't know, just generally worse than just running Xiangling instead, because, you know, it's much easier to run Xiangling than the Anemo abuse comps. Like, you have to have the Anemo up, and then you also have to apply Pyro, you have to infuse the right thing. If the enemies have elements on them, you might infuse the wrong thing into the burst, and then like, it's a whole mess of things basically, right? And then for the Jean plus Bennett combination, I mean, like, you have two healers on one team, it's really weird, like, I don't know. Basically, I just think that, you know, getting the Pyro Resonance and running Xiangling instead is just easier, but yeah, that's just me. But yeah, other than that, Zhongli's really strong, really good pairing with Ganyu in my opinion, and yeah, I would highly recommend it. So, to conclude here, yeah, Ganyu is still crazy. Even with characters like Ayaka out, I think that Ganyu is still really strong, right? I think that their damage is really not very dissimilar, especially on the melt side, just because Ganyu's number vomit is just so disgusting. Ganyu, I think, is much more flexible, right? She just does charge shots, right? You don't have to rely on your burst, you don't have to rely on energy, you don't have to rely on cooldowns. It's just much more difficult for you to have problems than a character like Ayaka. And of course, there are examples of Ganyu hate, well, one example, which is Magokenki, but we haven't seen another one since Magokenki, so I don't know, maybe MiHoYo's not going in that direction, and I think that, you know, for Ganyu, it's kind of weird to have that type of hate against her, because, you know, it just kind of screws a ton of ranged characters that is just unnecessary. So yeah, I think that Ganyu hate, some things that counter Ganyu I should say, is very difficult to come by. Much more difficult than Ayaka counters. Because of that, I think Ganyu is probably safer than Ayaka, and she's probably just as strong. I think her lower rarity weapon options are definitely something that is a bit annoying, so that is something to consider. But you have Almos's bow. I really think that Ganyu is almost a must pull. Maybe not quite that level, but she's up there, no question. Now, a little bit of a word of caution. Ganyu is a pretty old character, right? It's been an entire year since she's been released at this point, basically. Which means that we could be seeing power creep soon, right? I think MiHoYo's been very careful about power creep since Ganyu's been released. Like, there's huge jumps in power creep with like Ganyu, Xiao, and Hu Tao, and since then it's been fairly linear. Like, we really haven't seen very large power creeps since then, and yeah, I mean, maybe it's safe, but you know, she's old, right? I think you can definitely start to expect a stronger cryo DPS in the future, in the near future I should say, so definitely pay attention to that. But I think even when she's power crept, like, that doesn't mean she's useless, right? She's probably still going to be able to clear all the content in the game very comfortably. I think she's still a fairly safe pull. Something else that I will mention is that if you're not playing Morgana, if you're not playing Zhongli, it's super annoying. You get hit all the time. It'll cancel your charge out animations, you'll lose a ton of damage. It's very hard to play. So I'd highly recommend either playing Freeze, which is, as I've said, a lot more iffy because of frozen immune enemies, or pulling for Zhongli. Yeah, other than that, if you do have Zhongli, if you do have Almos's bow, I mean, I think Ganyu is absolutely amazing. She's truly one of the best DPS in the game still. Like, she's absolutely incredible. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Like if you liked, comment down below. If you have anything interesting to say, subscribe to my channel for more Genshin content, and yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.